Now, Simon, I have a mentor by the name of Jim Rohn, and he would say that you can learn from both sides of this human drama, not only in examples, do what these guys did, but also in warnings. Don't do what these people did, right? So give us a few examples of a leader that made some mistakes that we should take lessons from in order to develop our own leadership abilities for the better.
Well, if they're a good leader, I think all of them made mistakes. The question is whether they were aware of their mistakes and had any intention of building upon those mistakes, and whether they seek to learn to be students of leadership. I think a great example of this would be David Marquet. David Marquet was a career naval officer. And the reason I use, by the way, so many military examples, it's not that great leadership only exists in the military. There's some bad examples there too. It's that when life and death are on the line, the lessons are much more exaggerated. They're just easier to see, but they apply everywhere. So David was a career naval officer and graduated near the top of his class at Annapolis, was a submariner, and earned one of the great honors of a career. He was given command of his own submarine, of his own boat, Los Angeles class, nuclear-powered fast attack sub. He was given the USS Olympia, which was one of the best-rated crews in the whole fleet. Now, David made the error of believing that his credibility as a leader was based on his intelligence and how much he knew. And he spent an entire year learning every system, every valve, every switch of the Olympia. He read the dossiers of his crew. He knew everything about them. 2 weeks before he was to take command, he got a phone call that said, "You're not going to be the captain of the Olympia. You're going to be the captain of the Santa Fe," a slightly newer Los Angeles-class submarine. And the crew, incidentally, was the worst-rated crew in the entire United States submarine fleet. They ranked last or close to last in almost every readiness measurement that the Navy had. But even though David didn't want to let on that he didn't know everything about this newer submarine, because his credibility was tied to his intelligence and his know-how, he also had a good ego, as a good leader should, and believed that if he gave good orders, he would have a good ship, and if he gave great orders, he would have a great ship. So he was going to turn the ship around. Well, on the first day, he was barking orders and everybody was doing what he was saying and everything was going smoothly. Fantastic. On about the second or third day out, they were submerged and they ran an exercise. They turned off the nuclear reactor manually and pretended they had a meltdown. And they ran the ship on something called EPM, in other words, battery power. Marquet wanted to add a little stress to the environment to see how his crew reacted, and he gave a simple order: ahead 2/3, which means run the engines 2/3 of their maximum speed. The navigator who was standing beside him, who incidentally was the most experienced sailor aboard, he'd been aboard this vessel for 2.5 years, repeated the order, ahead 2/3, and nothing happened. Marquet peered out from the side of his periscope and sees Seaman Jones sitting in front of the control panel squirming, and he says to Seaman Jones, "What's the problem?" And Seaman Jones replies, "Sir, there is no 2/3 setting. Apparently on this slightly newer submarine, there just was no 2/3 setting on the EPM." Marquet turns to the navigator and says, "Did you know this?" And the navigator goes, "Mm-hmm." He says, "Then why did you give the order?" He says, "'Cause you told me to." And it's at that point Marquet realized that he was on a boat that he didn't fully understand, and he had a crew that was trained for compliance. It's not like he could just turn it around and trade in his crew and get a different crew or get a different boat. In the private sector, we think we have an advantage because we can hire and fire. We're assuming that we're hiring and firing the right people. It's not that we have a failure or things aren't working. You simply change the people and things work again. How many times have reorgs actually worked? Barely, if ever. In other words, it's not the people, it's the environment. It's not the people, it's the environment. So Marquet, with no option, had to completely reinvent and re-understand how he understood and how leadership worked. And he realized that the front-line person, this lowest-level crew member, this guy with a couple stripes on his arm, knew more about what to do for his job than Marquet did. So Marquet realized he had no option but to trust the people on the front. And one of his big conclusions was that the people at the top of an organization have all the authority, but none of the information. The people at the bottom of the organization have all the information and none of the authority. So it's not about pushing the information up. That rarely, if ever, works. It's about pushing the authority down. Marquet banned the words permission to and replaced them with I intend. So it was no longer, sir, permission to dive to 400 feet, permission granted, aye, sir. All the accountability lies with the captain. Now it was, sir, I intend to dive to 400 feet. The The chain of command is not broken, but psychically all of the responsibility lies with the person performing their actions. Well, if you think about our organizations, we have tacitly permission-based organizations. Can you just double check this? Let me run this idea by you. Can you just approve this before I send it to the client, as opposed to I intend to send this to the client at 8:00 tonight, whether somebody looks at it or not. And what happened was there was a remarkable turnaround story. Marquet's crew, the same crew, became the highest rated crew in naval history. More importantly, it wasn't just a turnaround story, it was a factory for leaders. The re-enlistment rate on the Santa Fe prior was 3 people. The average in the Navy is about 15 or 20. After Marquet, the re-enlistment rate went up to 33. The average number of officers who get promoted to their own commands in the Navy is about 1 or 2 or 3 officers will get promoted to their own commands from each boat. In Marquet's, 9 out of the 14 officers went on to get their own commands, and all of them have remarkable stories of success afterwards. And this really becomes the true lesson of a leader. A leader's job is not just to get the best out of their people. A leader's job is to make more leaders. And I think that's something that a lot of leaders neglect, that their responsibility is not just how well does the organization perform when they're in the position of authority, but how well will the organization perform when they leave? What kind of foundation did they leave? Did they produce more leaders? So Marquet wrote about his experience in a remarkable book called Turn the Ship Around. His name is Marquet, and I highly recommend it. He goes through it piece by piece, and it's an invaluable manual for any organization that needs to turn their culture around.